All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Antonio.Viramontes. I'm the Director of Health and Prevention Services at the LGBTQ Center Orange County, and I'm here to talk to you about sex. Well, specifically, gender and sex. So, here, let me share my screen. Okay. So here's today's agenda. We're going to dive in briefly into, we're going to cover a little bit of LGBTQ 101. We're going to focus on gender and gender identity and gender expression. We're going to go into some commonly asked questions. Then we're going to learn a little bit about pronouns. You know, we hear a lot about them, like Tony, Viramontes, he, him, his, are my pronouns. But I could also say I'm Tony Viramontes, they, them, theirs. You might also start seeing them or have seen them a whole lot more now in people's signatures, in their email signature specifically. So we're going to talk about pronouns and why it's important to recognize pronouns and validate them. Then we're going to learn a little bit on how to be an LGBTQ ally. And then we're going to talk about the phobias, the homophobia, the transphobia. So let's dive in. We're going to dive into some basic terminology, right? You've probably have heard already all of this and have an idea or know what this is, but bear with me for the next slide or two. So sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is who we are physically, emotionally, and romantically attracted to. I mean, in short, it's who we have the hornies for. You know, it's who are we sexually attracted to. Lesbian. Lesbian is a person who identifies as female, who is attracted to others who identify as female. Are we all with me? Are we all good here? Okay. Gay. Gay is a person who identifies as male, who is attracted to others who identify as male. But gay is also used by people of other genders to describe same gender attraction. The word gay has become almost a term that we've adopted to describe, in a sense, anyone from the LGBTQ community can say, oh yeah, I'm gay. And that's perfectly valid. Totally okay. Bisexual describes someone who is attracted to two or more genders. That's someone who is bisexual, or as I call them, the funnest person at the party. Sorry. We have, and then we have queer. Queer is a multifaceted word that is used in different ways and means different things to different people. In general, queer refers to not fitting cultural norms around sexuality, gender identity, or expression. Queer is a beautiful word. It's very unique to the individual. If someone identifies as queer, let's validate that and let's honor that. It means that they don't necessarily fall under any of these definitions, right? Any of these identities that have been designed in a way, and not designed, have been explained and adopted. Just when we use the word queer, tread softly, because queer is a very triggering word for some individuals, meaning there are some individuals who the word queer has very negative feelings attached to it. And that's because not too long ago, the word queer was a very offensive term. And usually when someone was called a queer, it came with a beating attached to it. So it's important to understand words, and it's important to understand where they come from so that we know how they've been repurposed and redefined and reused. Gender identity. All right, so let's talk about gender now. Gender identity is this deep, deep sense of self. It's knowing in your soul, in your heart, in your mind, who you are. It is the deeply held internal sense of self as either male or female, a blend of both, absolutely neither. But it has to do solely with who you are at your core. That innate sense of self that only you know for yourself. That's your gender identity. So what is sex? Well, I mean, you know what sex is, but sex in these terms. Sex is honestly, when we talk about sex here, is purely physical and purely based on anatomy. When we talk about sex, we are talking about genitals. So even furthermore, like what sex was someone assigned at birth? And the word assigned is really important, right? Because it means that when a baby is born, usually the first thing they do is they look between their legs to see what genitals exist, you know? And then a sex is assigned on that baby based on that, right? Based on a penis or a vagina, that child is now assigned a sex. But we don't just assign, and I use the word we as society, we don't just assign a sex to that baby. We're assigning expectations. We're assigning gender. We're assigning roles. We're assigning what that child's favorite color should be, what they should be into, who they should marry, what profession they should have. Strike that. Let's think of sex purely as a physical anatomy of an individual. A sex just means that an individual was born with a vagina or a penis, or they could be intersex and have a combination of both or neither. Just depends on the anatomy of the individual. It's also very important to remember that the body parts of the individual and whatever body parts this person is born with does not determine the individual's gender. So gender expression. Let me ask you this. Does everyone have a gender expression, or is that just something that transgender people have? That's an awkward silence, but yes, everyone has a gender expression. A gender expression is everything that we do to tell the world who we are. So, you know, we talked about gender identity earlier, right? That innate sense of self. Well, the gender expression of an individual is what we do out here externally, so the world knows what our gender identity is. It just refers to how a person expresses their gender identity, or cues people use to identify another person's gender. This can include clothing or mannerisms or makeup, speech patterns, but absolutely everyone has a gender expression. You know, I always talk about it like this. Take a look at what you're wearing today. I know your cameras are probably off, but take a look at what you're wearing right now. Hopefully you're wearing pajamas or whatever it is you're wearing, right? You picked that. You picked to wear that today. Maybe because it makes you feel comfortable, maybe because it's the only thing you have left, but somewhere around the day before your day started, you made the choice to wear that today. But you made the choice to buy that. Or maybe someone gifted it to you, but you made the choice to keep it. So everything that you have on is expressing your gender right now, right? But let's talk a little bit more about gender and gender expression. What happens when you want to express yourself and express your gender, but you're not able to because social expectations don't let you? I mean, 100 years ago, a woman couldn't wear pants because pants were deemed purely for men. So what happens if you want to wear pants because that's more comfortable, but you can't because socially you're not allowed to? Or men want to wear skirts or fluid clothes because it just feels more comfortable, but you're not allowed to. So that was 100 years ago, right? But let's talk about now. What happens when you wake up in the morning and you look at yourself in the mirror and you don't feel complete? Because inside at your core, you know who you are. But you also know that if you express that to the world, your neighbors might harass you. your landlord might ask you to move out. If you're going for a job, you might not get the job. Or worst case scenario, you might get killed just because you're trying to express your gender in a way that's going to make you feel comfortable and make you feel complete. You know, we talked about whatever you're wearing right now, probably pajamas, probably some sweatshirt, something comfortable, but it's yours and it makes you feel like you because those articles are yours, because you bought them, you picked them, you chose to wear them today. But what would happen if you're not allowed to do that? If socially, you know you can't express your gender because your life might be at stake if you do. It's something we don't think about often, but for transgender people, it's something they think about every second of every minute of every day. I wish I could ask for questions right now. All right, so what is cisgender? Well, cisgender comes from the Greek word cis, which means on the same side as. So I'm going to make this really simple, right? Cisgender is somebody who doesn't identify as transgender. So if you don't identify as transgender, well, then that means you are cisgender. So what is transgender? Okay, so transgender is an umbrella term for people who transition from one gender to another, or people who defy social expectations of how they should look or act or identify based on that assigned sex at birth. So again, when we use the word transgender, think of it as, again, as this umbrella term that covers a lot of different facets of what a transgender person is or could be. For example, FTM, female to male, it's a transgender male. MTF, male to female, that's a transgender female. A transsexual, pre-op, post-op, non-op, someone who's genderqueer, maybe bigendered, third gender. There's the drag queen, drag king, cross-dresser, intersex. All of those fall under the transgender term. But to keep this simple, really transgender is just someone who doesn't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth based on that sex that they were assigned at birth. And at some point they begin a transition, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But what is non-binary? Well, if we think of binary, which is bi means two, as a spectrum, right? Or as the binary meaning we have male and female as almost the two options to identify like that. Those are the gender options. Those are the boxes we can check. We are male or we are female. Well, non-binary means you don't identify with neither of those. And we don't have to, thank goodness, right? We can just be ourselves, and that's a beautiful thing to be. So non-binary, it's a spectrum of gender identities and expression, often based on the rejection of the notion that gender is strictly either male or female. So take a look at this image real quick. I actually really like it because it lets us understand gender and identity and expression and sex a little better and a little easier, right? Look at this person, and we have the identity, right? The identity is coming from the brain. It's that sense of self. It's knowing who you are. And now we have sexual orientation, which is your attraction. Well, that's your heart. That's who you love. That's who you want to be with, and you get the feels for, and you wish they send you chocolates on Valentine's Day and get mad because they don't. Like, you know, like that's your sexual orientation. Our sex, purely biological, based on our genitals. Our sexual, and then we have our gender expression. Our gender expression, think of it as this outer layer, right? Like a shell almost. It's what we put out to the world that expresses who we are. I always talk about it like this as well. You know, gender A gender identity is who I go to bed as. Sexual attraction or sexual orientation is who I go to bed with. Some frequently asked questions. Can I tell if someone is transgender? Absolutely not always. And there's many reasons for this. I mean, you can tell, not necessarily, because some trans people pass. When I say pass, it just means that they have engaged in a transition that's very unique to them, so that they can live an authentic life that's uniquely to themselves. But also, their gender expression now is well, it's passing, meaning that trans men will do everything they can for those who want to be passing to pass, meaning surgeries, implants, hair implants, removing hair, all that stuff, right? So that's really what passing means. Yeah, can someone pass as the gender they are? I have a problem with the word pass, if I'm being honest, because I feel that I feel like that is still taking away from the person's identity, and no one should pass. Like, if this isn't like it's not a college course. My gender is not being graded. I shouldn't pass or not pass. I should pass and get an A, or not pass and get an F. My gender's mine, and I get to decide what it means to me. But again, we're talking about social expectations. For some individuals, passing is absolutely necessary because that's the way they won't get harassed. That's the way they'll get the job. That's the way they'll keep the job. For others, for others, passing is not even an option. They don't want to, because again, gender identity is so unique to oneself. Some individuals are transgender and they don't need to go through surgeries. It's not, because they are content with knowing it themselves in their heart, knowing who they are, and dressing how they want to, and not ever having a single surgery. And that's fine, because that's their journey and it's unique to them, because it's their gender identity. Others can't pass because they don't have the means. I mean, we're talking about barriers to healthcare. If we want to talk about barriers to healthcare, look into all of the barriers that exist for the transgender population and communities. The number of health disparities, right, that exists there, it's huge. And the biggest problem is it's huge, it's ginormous, we know it, and it's not documented. Because a big problem exists with a lot of our healthcare providers, that they're still not taking a look and truly counting transgender people. So yeah, I mean, we can talk about this forever. Maybe I can come back and talk about that. But in terms of, can I tell if someone's transgender? Well, no, of course not. Of course not. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. And that's totally okay. What is the gender transition? All right, so a gender transition is something so personal to the individual who is actually going through a gender transition. It can mean multiple things. I talked about it a little earlier, but it can mean hormone therapy. If someone wants to transition from male to female, maybe they do hormone blockers to block testosterone and begin taking estrogen. Maybe it means they get breast implants, or any other kind of, like, maybe facial feminization. They might get laser hair removal to remove stubble or beards or chest hair. It also means changing your name legally on all your documents, so that you can now be seen legally as your preferred name. So even those are just some steps, some examples. No gender transition is identical. No gender transition is the same, because we are not identical and we are not the same. And the gender transition is very unique to the individual going through their transition. They know what it is they need, to achieve that level of completeness and wholeness internally and externally. More frequently asked questions. Are transgender people the same as gay and lesbian people? I hear this a lot. It's like, well, if someone's trans, if, like, for example, I facilitate a lot of groups, and I remember this one time I had a speaker come in, and she was a post-op means post-operation, post-gender affirming surgery, transgender female, meaning born male, transition to female, who came to facilitate a discussion with me and brought her wife. And everyone fell backwards. They were like, wait, you were born male, you transitioned to be a female, and then you married a female. And that's, of course, she was like, well, yeah, because her sexual identity, orientation is lesbian. Her gender identity is transgender female. Her sexual orientation is lesbian because she's attracted to other females. A lot of the times, again, and it goes back to those social expectations, social norms, social behaviors, right? If you have a penis, this is what your life should look like. If you have a vagina, this is what your life should look like. And this is who you should like. And this is who you should marry. But that's not the case. It shouldn't be, right? We should all have the choice to be happy and be free and be our true, authentic selves and be with whoever it is we want to be with. So, are trans people the same as gay and lesbian people? No. Transgender is about a gender identity and gender expression, or gay, lesbian, bisexual, even heterosexual, straight, that's about sexual orientation. It's like I said earlier. My gender identity is who I go to bed as. My sexual orientation is who I go to bed with. So, let's talk about gender pronoun, right? Practice this. Really, there's nothing wrong with it. It's actually quite fascinating. I dare you to just go around and tell individuals, hey, this is my name, I'm Tony, and I'm he, him, his. And they'll look at you and they'll be like, what? Why? It's like, well, because you would have assumed my pronouns. You would have assumed that I'm he, him, his, but you don't know that. Maybe that makes me feel really uncomfortable. So I have to tell you my pronouns so that now you know. But, you know, some examples here. We have she, her, hers, and he, him, his, which are the most commonly used pronouns. These pronouns support male and female identities. Some people avoid these labels because their identity isn't solely male or female. For example, I'm Tony, and for the most of the time, I identify with he, him, his. But I will always turn around for a hey girl. Some people even talk, and it's funny because some people describe me as she, and I'm totally cool with it. It's chill. I don't care. It works for me, you know? So yeah, but sometimes, even non-binary people, the people who don't identify as male or female, well, they might adopt gender-neutral pronouns. They'll adopt they, them, theirs. So here, some examples would be, Addison ate his food because he was hungry. In terms of like when we talk about individuals, right? Because sometimes people are like, well, I don't want to use they, them, theirs because it's not grammatically correct. Like, how? I've been taught grammar for all these years, and now you're telling me that I have to use they, them all the time? Well, yeah, because it makes someone feel good. And because it validates someone's gender and someone's existence. And it can be done, you know? So as simple as saying like, Addison ate his food because he was hungry, if Addison identifies as male. Addison ate her food because she was hungry, if Addison were to identify as female. But if Addison was genderqueer or non-binary and preferred they, them pronouns, you would just say Addison ate their food because they were hungry. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, being professional and being even friendly when addressing you know, trans people. Don't ask a person what their real name is. Please don't. You know, sometimes we're curious, sometimes we want to know, but you know how we all have things that are very personal to ourselves? Someone who's transgender, who has gone through a transition or starting a transition and wants and has asked individuals to call them by a preferred name, respect that and just call them by that name. Don't ask what your real name is. Transgender people usually refer to that as their dead name because that's what it feels like. So bringing that up can be very triggering to some trans people. It's best to avoid. If someone trusts you and tells you on their own, be thankful for that because someone is sharing a part of themselves with you. But don't go around asking people. Point number 2 is, when in doubt about someone's gender identity, just use they, them pronouns. If you meet someone and you're not sure what their gender identity is or how they identify, use they, them. You can never go wrong. You won't offend them because they're gender neutral. Respect the pronouns and name of a transgender person. You know, we keep going in circles around this, but it's really important, right? We want to validate a person's existence. We want to validate who they are. And also, it's taking a little effort from us. Someone's asking us to call them a certain name. The least we can do is call them that name. Someone's asking us to address them certain pronouns. Least we can do is address them in those pronouns. It's not going to cost us anything. Regardless of what our views are, regardless of what our feelings are, regardless of how confusing that is to us. At the end of the day, we just want to address people in a way that makes them feel comfortable because it's about them. It's not about us. Just like your identity is so personal to you, well, that's about you, you know? And you wouldn't like it if I come over and I misgender you. Or if you tell me your name is Lisa and I keep calling you, I don't know, Ashley. You know, just respect individuals. Let's call them by what name they want to be, they want to use, and whatever pronoun it is they identify with. So, let's talk about becoming an ally to the trans community. Well, mainly, the first thing is, you know, just respect people. It's such a simple rule, right? The golden rule. Let's just respect individuals for who they are. It's that simple. Never assume someone's gender identity or sexual orientation. You know, it's just not okay to assume. Individuals, again, individuals come in all stripes and shapes and colors, and that's beautiful. So let's not assume anything about anybody. Always respect pronouns. It's super important. And again, when in doubt, gender neutral, they, them, theirs. And keep in mind that gender expression is fluid and may not match preconceived notions of male or female. You might see some individuals might have a full beard and wear a dress. And that's okay because that's who they are. It makes them feel comfortable. Gender expression is so unique to us and to who we are. And it is fluid. It can be whatever we want it to be because it's ours. So understand that. Respect that. That's it. So let's identify some microaggressions, right? So first of all, what's a microaggression? Well, a microaggression is an indirect or a subtle or an unintentional discrimination against a member of a marginalized community. Not calling someone by their name, by their preferred name. That can be a microaggression. And believe me, we all make mistakes. Sometimes if one of your friends who you are really close to is going through a transition and they ask you to call them their preferred name now, it can take a time for you to get used to. And that's okay. Because as long as you're coming from a place of support and you apologize and you let them know you're trying, people will understand that. But when it's done routinely without you making an effort to truly change, and even sometimes it can be malicious, you know, to just purposefully misgender someone, purposefully call someone by their dead name. Well, those are aggressions towards someone's gender or gender identity. You know, examples, referring to someone by their real name or their dead name, making assumptions about someone's gender identity, using language like, you don't look trans, try to avoid that. Or assuming that a trans person is a sex worker because that's what you saw in a study once, or that's what someone said during a lecture once. It's about understanding individuals and understanding the health disparities, right? And understanding them and understanding the population. And yes, some trans people are sex workers because it's the only way they're able to survive. But just like some cis people are sex workers and some straight people are sex workers and some LGBTQ people are sex workers. So let's just not assume anything about anybody. I'd like to finish it like this. We look at transphobia. We'll look at homophobia. First of all, the homophobia, I believe Webster's dictionary defines it as like negative actions based on someone's sexual orientation. And transphobia, again, looking at Webster's definition, it's like negative actions or behavior towards someone who's transgender. But I have a real problem with that because phobia is defined as fear. This innate, uncontrollable fear, right? That's a phobia. So adding the word phobia to the word trans, it's almost creating an excuse for it. I was scared, which is why my actions were negative. But see, if someone doesn't like women and they're afraid of them, well, we don't call it woman phobia. We call that sexism. And if someone is scared of Latinos or people of color, well, we don't call them, and we don't excuse them as, well, they just have Latino phobia. We call that racism. So we shouldn't excuse negative actions towards trans people or LGBTQ people by saying that someone's afraid of them or scared. We need to call that hate. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Tony.Viramontes, a pleasure to be here today. Do you have any questions? My email is Tony.Viramontes, Antonio.Viramontes at the LGBTQ Center OC. I'm sure Tony will post it in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email. Send me questions. Anything, if anything that makes sense, please reach out. I love having these conversations. Have a good night. Bye.